All I know is like we live in LA. We couldn't be farther from Canada. Maybe Florida is a little bit farther at the tip, but you know, there was a big day down here, and Trudeau was stepping down, and it just seems like he's still there. And like even the chick whose grandma was a Nazi, still there. Like they all stepped down, but they're still there. What's going on with that, Richard?
Yeah, he's like a perspiration stain. You can't get out of a garment. It is he's officially stepping down once the new leader is elected, which will happen March 9th. So he's doing his, I guess, his victory lap, and he's going on, continuing to apologize for everything that Canada has done over its 150 years. But we'll be finally done with his meddlesome prime minister as of March the 9th. And then we're likely to get another globalist in his place. It looks like Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. I mean, talk about, an elitist. This guy's just incredible. He just admitted on a podcast down in the States, he sort of embraced his, globalism and elitism because he was asked, what's your greatest weakness, Mr. Carney? And he said, well, people think I'm a globalist and an elitist, but he says that's exactly what Canada needs right now. Excuse me? We just had 9 years of that. Didn't end well. So more of the same with Mark Carney, except it's kind of scary because Trudeau was all about the hair and the crazy socks. Mark Carney actually is pretty, intelligent. Went to Harvard, I think, or Yale. He's an Ivy League guy. He's bright, but he's just as woke and just as much a globalist as Mark Carney is, or as Justin Trudeau is.
New boss, same as old boss, and sometimes I don't know if this applies to Trudeau, but the devil almost, and what's going to happen now with a new guy in. And it's really sad. It's really sad to have watched what has happened in Canada because I've been touring in Canada for decades now, and it would always be amazing to go there and see everybody. And they're really, I used to joke about why would there be airport security in Canada? Because everyone loves Canada. It's like the koala bear of humanity. Like, I don't know. I've never met anyone who's like, oh, these fucking Canadians, bro. They were always like, everyone loves Canadians. And like, you've never been in Toronto? Have you been to Toronto?
No, never.
Oh my God, you go there and they just have like smoke shows for security. It's like the craziest shit I've ever seen. They're like drop dead gorgeous women pointing where you should go, and I'm like, what Toronto to me is everything that humanity is what humanity is possible of if you don't spend 50 cents on a dollar on your military. Like it really is a gorgeous city with gorgeous people. And it like everyone's happy. I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure we could sit there and be like, oh, this problem. But it makes me sad to see what Trudeau has done to that country. And it really does, Richard, let you know that like how powerless you can be. Like everyone talks about revolution and fighting back, but it's like it's really hard when the entire system is working against you.
Is there any chance
you raise a fuss up here and they freeze your bank accounts. That's how we do business up here. That's how they deal with dissidents up here in Canada. They freeze your bank accounts.
That's crazy. Is there any chance of it being Pierre-Poilievre? Is that?
Yes. There's a very good chance that it'll be Pierre-Poilievre, the Conservative Party. What's scary though is when Trudeau was before he announced his resignation, the Conservatives were up in the polls by like 20, 25 points over the Liberals. Then is when Trudeau resigned and Mark Carney was being sort of foisted upon us. And it looks like he's just going to be sort of anointed and named Liberal leader. He'll be prime minister without being elected. That's how our system is kind of crazy. He won't have a seat in parliament. He's just some bureaucrat who will suddenly become the prime minister until the government falls and there will be an election. There has to be one by October of this year. So now that Mark Carney is expected to be the leader, some polls have them sort of neck and neck. Some polls have the Conservatives slightly ahead. And according to some seat projections, there's even a scenario where the Liberals could come back with a majority government, which means we'd be stuck with them for another 4 or 5 years, which I just cannot even contemplate that. I mean, I don't know. Is there room on your sofa? I may have to pack up and move down there.
Yeah. You can live in the studio, bro. It's a nice place. They got showers around here. Open. Come. We're taking refugees. Why not? Yeah, it is crazy to me. And then it kind of gets into this thing that we talk about all the time on the show is about, the U.S. Electoral College versus what Canada has. And it seems to be that Canada, Toronto, and the province of Ontario, right? It's the Ontario province?
That's right.
They seem to decide who is the leader every year. And, because these are giant cities, we get in the group think. People work in corporations. You'll never be able to move up unless you just bend over backwards, spewing progressive stupid. And that's how they vote. They vote group think because that's how they're going to progress in their corporate job. And it gets impossible to get out of that cycle. And it just makes me really sad. These guys coming in, the situation with Trudeau is, we've been talking on this show about how Trudeau and Gavin Newsom are the same guy. They're just incredibly charismatic, good-looking guys that make progressive females' panties drop, and they can do no wrong. They could do no wrong. And just the craziness. And, for me, I don't think anything happens by accident. I'm not saying they can't make mistakes. But when you're gaslighting Canadian patriots for demanding the right to live their life not under draconian laws of COVID, and you call them Nazis, and then you invite an actual Nazi to your government building where you guys what do you call your
Parliament or House of Commons? Yeah,
your House of Commons. I mean, it's shocking to me. Is there any way that wasn't done on purpose for maximum emotional damage?
Well, no, I think I would chalk that one up to just stupidity. Nobody in the PMO or the Prime Minister's office properly vetted this person. That one I just chalk up to pure incompetence. But the thing about the left, and I draw a distinction between the left, even though the Liberal Party is left, it wasn't always very, radically left. The Liberal Party in Canada used to be sort of pretty centrist, right down the middle of the road. That's why they've sort of been known as the natural governing party of Canada, and they've governed the country for most of its 150 years. But the thing about the left and the Liberals around 2015, maybe 2013, just before Trudeau took over as leader, as your great Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana likes to say, they're 10 exits past crazy now. And they are so far left. But the thing about the left is they are just, you have to admire this in a way. They're just so audacious and unabashed. Like they will lie right to your face. Like imagine, waking up, you hear a noise downstairs, you flick on the lights and there's someone with their hand in the cookie jar and they're eating the cookie right in front of you. And you say, hey, you're stealing my cookie. And while they're eating it, looking at you, no, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
That's what, and Bill Clinton was good at that too, right? He used to do that. Like he could lie right to your face.
Yeah.
And almost convince you, like, well, I guess I am seeing things. I must be crazy. But they're so good at that. I don't know how they do it. It's some kind of, I don't know, magic.
It's data. It's data over time. It's like they study you. Are you a psychopath? I mean, Trudeau has a rich history of scandals, from getting ran out of his school, having to pay a lawsuit out, blackface, his reaction to his brother dying, which gets into some occult sacrifice stuff. Like he blames his brother for it, like zero emotion. Who's his real dad? I mean, it just goes on. His connection to Pinkleton or whatever the pig farmer guy's name is. Like, it's really crazy.
His half brother is Kyle Kemper. Margaret Trudeau remarried after divorcing Pierre Trudeau. And, excuse me. And I've had Kyle Kemper on the program a number of times. And recently, Kyle Kemper, who lives down in Florida now, very outspoken about his brother. He believes he's being controlled. But he had this very cryptic, maybe not so cryptic, post on social media recently when he started talking about, imagine going to a white party. I guess referencing P. Diddy, right? Imagine going to a white party and maybe taking a sip of a drink that you weren't supposed to. And then all of a sudden you find yourself doing some very bizarre things, only to discover that it was all captured on camera. Now imagine you're a politician. And now the people that are in possession of this video are telling you what to do. He was referencing his brother. I don't think there was any question about that. So I got to get Kyle Kemper back on the program and see if I can get him to reveal a little bit more. But he seems to firmly believe that Trudeau, he's like a Manchurian candidate. I mean, it explains a lot of the things that he does. It's like, you look at the mess this country's in. It's like, I couldn't do a better job of destroying this country if I were doing it on purpose. And I think maybe he is.
Yeah, I think they are being led by barbarians. And I talk about that in LA. We have allowed the barbarians in. While we all focus on Washington, D.C., we allowed Karen Bass to get elected in a very shady way over the guy that she's running,
Rick Caruso.
Rick Caruso. I mean, I felt momentum for Rick Caruso, and then all of a sudden she pulled it out, and you're like, how did that just happen? We let the barbarians in. And when you're constantly, especially when you're dealing with progressives, their whole ideology is the theory of things, the theory of hate. They're constantly fighting shadows in the cave. And still to this day, if you listen to MSNBC, this is theoretically what could happen instead of what is happening. Oh, $4 trillion. We just found out $4 trillion was sent out. We don't know where it went. We can't find out where they sent it. We don't care about that. What about the fact that, Trump may become the last emperor? That is to people who have a ton of money. And I guarantee you that the MSNBC crowd is affluent. They're rich.
Yeah, it's like, leave these corrupt agencies that are stealing taxpayers' money alone.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, again, complaining about everything's too expensive in California. Gas is too expensive. Crime is out of control. Drug abuse out of control. Homelessness out of control. Does not matter. Keep voting in the barbarians. Keep voting in, like when we study how Gavin Newsom, his last election, no one can tell me the Republican he ran against. I ask Republicans, what is that dude's name? Nobody knows his name. Was the worst ran campaign I've ever seen, to the point you got to go, did he throw the game? Was he just placed there by Republicans who are in on it, who are taking all the same money that the Democrats are taking to put up a candidate that resonated with nobody, so Gavin Newsom could continue to flip the state into a feudal system of extremely rich and extremely poor, no middle class?
Yeah, it's the uniparty. It's the two-headed monster. It's similar up here. I mean, up until recently, I would say, but now Pierre-Poilievre of the Conservatives is really sort of moved to the right, I think, in large measure because of Donald Trump, thank God. I mean, and we see the rise of the populist right in Europe as well. So Poilievre is moving a little bit further right. He's being forced to, taking tougher stands on immigration and so forth. But prior to that, there really wasn't much difference between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
I agree.
Yeah.
In Canada, for sure. I always said the most conservative Canadian is pretty much a Liberal in America. When I used to do gigs there, they were conservative, but they would identify as probably a Democrat in America.
Well, yeah, they used to call them Southern Democrats. The Southern Democrats were more conservative probably than our conservatives were up here. Yeah.
I totally agree. So this Carney guy, Mark Carney, who's going to be the guy in, it's very weird to me because it's like, yeah, he's going to be the next guy. You're like, well, aren't we voting on it? I mean, don't we have a vote coming up? Have we decided that? But it seems like they are. Governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. And whenever you see the Bank of England, you should be very scared. It's like whenever you see anything labeled Babylonian to me, there are occult. And again, if you go, Sam, who runs Israel, who runs Saudi Arabia, who runs China, who runs India, who runs the United States, I would say the Bank of England and the black nobility and what they do. So if this guy is in charge of the Bank of England in Canada, you have to really wonder what's going on, right?
Yeah, and he's a real climate zealot to boot. He published a book called Values. And I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he wasn't planning on running when he wrote the book, because his own words are going to come back to haunt him. And I hope Poilievre just sits, if they have a debate, I just hope he just, reads from this book, chapter 1, and he'll be hanged by his own words. But he's talking about, the need for, achieving net zero, which the rest of the world is abandoning because it was a suicide mission. But he's talking about net zero, and if need be, we need to curtail personal freedoms in order to achieve it. What are you talking about? Another Emergency Act, which is basically the War Measures Act that we had during COVID. So he's basically hinting that he would bring that back in a heartbeat if necessary to achieve his, imagine climate lockdowns instead of COVID lockdowns. This is the way this guy thinks. But meanwhile, Canada is so rich in resources. We should be an energy superpower right along the United States. We don't need the rest of the world. If the two of us get together, Fortress North America, we don't need anybody. But they won't build pipelines in this country. We can't get our oil to market to Tidewater, which is why we sell our heavy crude to the United States. All of it that we don't use domestically goes to the United States, but we don't have a pipeline to get the oil to Eastern Canada, so we have to import millions and millions of barrels from Saudi Arabia. Yeah. It's insane. Damn. So they want to keep our energy in the ground.
And that's done on purpose because they need the House of Saud to control Mecca. So that's how they keep it going. If you keep buying Saudi Arabian oil, you basically fatten up the House of Saud, and they control Mecca. And if you control Mecca, you control Islam. And it is of my belief, Israel and Saudi Arabia are both being used to control that region. And they're just a Bank of England outposts. And everybody wants to go and, the Jew world order and all that. And this is Sam speaking, not Richard, It's not. There's levels above this shit. And they get you fighting with people on your level, which is my whole thing about the fight in the hockey. I talk to my friends, they're like, oh, it was great. I'm like, but dude, you got to understand, the public is fighting with each other while the fat cats do nothing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with war. They want war. Their kids are never going. Like Netanyahu's kid is in Miami right now, and they want to send U.S. troops to Gaza. What are we doing? So 100% you're correct. 100% you are correct that, this whole climate change thing is just all about taking away your freedoms. He basically came out and said it right there. And that's why whatever we think about Trump, and I can't enjoy him because Derek Bros or Whitney Webb is constantly in my, I constantly think of them and what they're saying, and we need them. We need them to be there to go, hey man, easy on the hopium, and is there another shoe that's going to drop? But I can go by itself. I'm happy we got the Paris Climate Accord because it was just going to rape the U.S. economy. That's all it was going to do.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, getting back to Mark Carney for a second, while he wants net zero for Canada and he doesn't want us to build pipelines and he wants a carbon tax on everything, he was the CEO of Brookfield Asset Management up until January. He resigned, and he has deferred shares and stock options. And Brookfield Asset Management, they own pipelines in other parts of the world. So he's fine building pipelines somewhere else. They own a huge coal port. It's called Dalrymple in Australia. They ship billions of tons of coal. It's metallurgical coal. This is the dirty coal that's used in the production of steel. They ship that to China. Brookfield Asset Management does. So they own that. So he's denying Canada the benefit, our birthright to use our resources. We should be the richest country in the world.
Yeah.
We have native reserves here that don't have proper drinking water in 2025. Never mind drinking water. We should have hot and cold running champagne in this country. We're so rich.
Yeah, dude. I'm with you. Same thing with America. I talk about it all the time, dude. This should be Dubai. This should be futuristic cities. We should all be driving futuristic cars. We have more oil than Saudi Arabia.
Dude, Izon just got back from Japan, and you won't talk about the technology in the toilets, let alone.
Yeah.
He's like, you're not like a prisoner where you have to take a shit between two holes and you can hand someone over there. It's like, it feels privacy. It feels nice. There's no...
The Japanese get it. They just can't stop. They won't have sex. That's the only problem with the Japanese. Like, they're too busy, like, watching anime. Nobody's hitting it.
Masturbating furiously because they have those machines, right? They're horny. They just are at home masturbating alone.
It just makes you wonder how awful Japanese feminists must be that nobody wants to hit it. They're like, oh, you're annoying. Let me just hook up with this anime robot. You know, it's crazy to me. But you're totally right. And, you know, it's interesting to me because I see some of your notes and like Carney's connection. Well, he has a sister-in-law who's friends with Ghislaine Maxwell. He's hobnobbing with Prince Andrew. I mean, it just seems like it's a small club and we ain't in it, right? I mean, that's
it's like these guys are sent down from central casting. I mean, it's so predictable that he would be in photos with Ghislaine Maxwell. The thing is, I get the sense that because he's also on the board at the World Economic Forum. He's on the board of directors on the WEF. So is Chrystia Freeland, who is our deputy prime minister, finance minister. She's running against Carney for the liberal leadership. But it's almost like someone at Davos basically tapped Justin on the shoulder and said, your time is up. The people hate you. We're swapping you out. We're bringing in a middle manager. In you go. He's going to the bullpen here. Klaus Schwab is going to the bullpen, and he asks for the righty. Yep. Mark Carney, you're in the game. That's what it feels like and smells like to me.
I agree with you. I think you can see that with Bill Gates. I think Bill Gates' brand is dead, and you have these other guys stepping up. What's his name we talked about from Oracle?
Oh,
Larry Ellison.
Larry Ellison, and then Sam Altman. Is that his name?
Altman, yeah.
Altman, yeah. I mean, they seem to be the new billionaire class who have very shady vibes.
Peter Thiel, too. He's kind of an old school carryover, but yeah, I think he's in there.
Yeah, but he doesn't seem to be out in front like those guys are, even though, I mean, maybe, again, Peter Thiel, I don't want to get, I'm not... There's why don't you call him out? I'm totally calling him out. He's anybody who looks like he's constantly sweating all the time, like is shady. I mean, he always looked like he just did something shady and he thinks he's about to get discovered. Does he not have that vibe? Like,
totally, yeah.
Right? Like, did you guys see what I just did? Please say no. Yeah. Richard, it's very interesting because there is a lot of dark occult history of Canada that, has come to light to me over the last couple of years because, again, I used to go to Canada all the time. My grandparents lived in Niagara Falls, so I'd go to Canada, and it was just like Niagara Falls, the United States, looks like a third world country compared to Niagara Falls, Canada. It's like it's night and day. I went to my first strip bar there, and I telling the girl, like, why are you doing this? You're too beautiful. I was being Captain Save-A-Ho at 18. Just enjoy the ride, kid. But I used to have this like romantic view of Canadians, and over time I've heard very just like our politicians, dark stuff. One of the big stories is the famous Queen Elizabeth with the Indigenous children story. Do you know that story?
No. I mean, I know I've been following a lot about the residential school issue and supposedly discovery of mass graves, which, well, that's another discussion. But they have yet to find a body. It's it's become the Indigenous industry, unfortunately. But tell me more about the Queen and.
The Queen got found guilty in a world court maybe you know this about the disappearance of 10 indigenous. What do you call them? Indigenous or natives or what are they called in Canada? I know there's a specific
First Nations. I don't know what day of the week is it. It seems to change. It's hard to keep up, but it's First Nations, Indigenous.
Yeah, First Indigenous Nations. people, and 10 kids disappeared, and she was actually found guilty in a court of law. And the story is that somebody in Britain tried to arrest her, and he was taken, thrown in a mental hospital, and put in like a permanent coma.
Wow. I don't know that story, but I'm not a huge fan of the monarchy. There's a great a line about the difference between Canada and the United States. There's a comedian up here, Hart Pomerantz. His brother created Cheers, the TV show Cheers. Anyway, Hart used to say the difference between Americans and Canadians is you shot your parents, we still send money home. Talking about the monarchy. But I don't know. I do like the sort of the pomp and circumstance, but I don't know that story. But I'll tell you, back in 2021, there was this report came out. We had residential schools. I think you had some in the United States as well, where, young Indigenous people were sent. Most of them were day schools. And, maybe they weren't the greatest places, all of them. Some of them were fine. Others maybe not so good. Listen, I know kids that went to public school that were, abused by their teachers. It's just one of the sad realities of life. In any institution, you're going to have good and you're going to have bad. And, of course, they had tuberculosis outbreaks in those schools. Actually, the children, you probably contracted it on the reservation. They brought it into the school. They're in close quarters. A lot of children died. Somehow that morphed into Catholic priests and nuns were strangling Indigenous children in their sleep and then chucking them into mass graves in the middle of the night. I kid you not. This is the narrative. And, of course, Justin Trudeau lapped that up, and he went on this apology tour. And then this created this Indigenous industry where they were, giving them millions and millions and millions of dollars. And some of that money was supposed to be spent on actually exhuming or doing an excavation, a forensic excavation of these supposed burial sites. Not a dime was spent on that. Not a shovel went into the ground. Instead, they spent millions of dollars hiring a PR firm, building a museum. Nothing, there's no attempt at trying to arrive at the truth. And the fact is, there's nobody unaccounted for. Yes, Indigenous people go missing. They're murdered. But that didn't happen. And me saying this, they're talking about making a law. They call it residential school denial, like Holocaust denial up here in Canada. The Liberals were talking about that. So me suggesting that maybe we look at the evidence and that maybe we didn't, or Catholic priests didn't strangle children and throw them into into an open pit in the middle of the night. Me suggesting that, could put me in jail. That's how crazy things are up here.
I think that's absolutely insanity. I mean, we have anti-Semitism laws coming, and it's absolutely crazy to me. Yeah. And that.
Yeah, what do you think the law is going to be exactly?
The law is that if you say something anti-Semitic, that's what they want. That they can curb anti-Semitism talk.
Well, we're on the record on Broken Sim that we think it's actually more than 6 million died during the Holocaust.
Yeah, we think it's 100 million people
all of
died.
I said
everybody?
300 million.
I think everybody died.
All of them, all the Jews.
Everyone. Yeah. Not just Jews, everybody.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, we're on the record. Everybody died. Whatever number you say, I agree to.
Times it times two.
Times that by two. It's like when chicks give you their body count, you add a zero. That's how I believe. And that same thing with the Holocaust. But they want to do it. And it's just like, watch yourself, dude. Watch yourself. You get a Streisand effect. You're actually going to make people look into it more. Yep. And people are going to start questioning stuff. But it goes, if I talk about something, right? It's like I do it on the internet all the time. When someone accuses me of something on the internet, I always go, what are you saying? Explain yourself. Explain yourself. Because I know who I am, and I know what I've done, and I ain't doing anything you're telling me I'm doing. And so why am I afraid of the discussion?
Yeah, it would be different, though, right? If you were getting accused of the same thing over and over again, you already knew what it was and why it was. Then at some point...
What do you mean, explain?
Well, I'm thinking about, I don't know, like Tom Hanks or something. You know what I mean? Like, if that is on his radar, he's been, he's got that thrown at him a million times.
Right.
I've
never seen anyone not acknowledge it, though, like that before. And not simple like, dude, you're crazy.
You just said Streisand.
How about this? Tom Hanks says,
effect,
you're crazy. You're crazy. That's a crazy thing. Move on. You've answered it. You've dismissed it in a hilarious way.
Yeah, you just said Streisand effect, though, and that would be, I mean, by denying it, he would be bringing more attention.
But Johnny, here's the thing. The internet has talked about it. Like his sketch he did on Saturday Night Live just reignited
I know, right?
everybody's.
What is he doing, dude?
And, dude, I saw giant accounts calling him out on that shit.
What is he doing, man?
You know? And, like, I went on your mom's house, which I thought one of our guests were going to say they were serial killers. Thank God that didn't go that way. I was like, oh, no, what am I going to do? My friends are serial killers. But it turns out they are not. But, you know, they were asking me about Tom Hanks. And I told them the whole mouthy Buddha thing. And I don't listen, I can talk about anything on these shows when you go on normie shows, but they always want to talk conspiracy. And their audience goes, who is this asshole? Who's this crazy guy? And I'm like, okay, dude, I get it. Come talk to me in 6 months. Come talk to me in 2 years. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The big talk is Canada being the 51st state. I personally don't like it. I love Canada. I think you guys, you know, if we can go back to 2015, Canada was amazing. The women are gorgeous. You guys are the nicest people. You all look so healthy because your healthcare is based on keeping prices down. I know it's not perfect, and I'm sure people will be like, oh, you don't even know. It takes like 8 years to get a doctor's appointment. But whatever it is, you know, I really loved it. I don't want you guys to be the 51st state because now we start getting into the North American Union and what that is. And like, is Trump giving us all these amazing things like auditing this, auditing that, so that he can slip things like this globalist territory that we've been hearing about forever? What are your thoughts?
Well, there isn't a mechanism really for us to become the 51st state. I mean, you have your procedures. It would have to be passed. I don't know if you'd have to convene like a convention with all 50 states and vote on it. I don't imagine, you know, Guam or Puerto Rico would be happy that we get to jump the queue, you know, and become the 51st state. But also, and then up here in Canada, there's just no constitutional mechanism really, but it would have to pass all 10 provincial legislatures and then the House of Commons. So, and you know, I don't think it's going to happen militarily anyway. I'm not worried about that. But economically, we're becoming more and more integrated all the time anyway. And I'm fine with that, quite frankly. The other thing, you know, I don't think Trump or the Republicans want Canada to be the 51st state because we're roughly the size of California in terms of population. How many electoral college votes do you get? 53 or something like that? Does he really want? Something like that. Does he really want another 53 congressional or electoral college votes going to the Democrats? Because basically we're, you know, they're all Democrats up here. I mean, I'm a unicorn up here. I'm like a Republican in support of the Second Amendment. I want conceal and carry in this country. Never going to happen. But I'm like a fish out of water. But most people up here would vote Democrat. And I don't think you want 53 electoral college votes locked in for the Democrats every year or every 4 years. So, but economic integration has been happening since like 1965. That's when we had the Auto Pact. And then there was, you know, the North American Free Trade Agreement. There was some big conference out in Vancouver where some of the big mucky mucks were discussing a common currency called the Amero. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. I forgot all about that. Wow.
Big time.
Yeah.
Just like the euro.
Yeah. And then there's then they had these meetings with the Prime Minister and the President of Mexico and the U.S. President. I think it was called the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Again, they were talking about more integration. And I believe in the nation state because, you know, you've got your own problems. We have our problems. Ottawa is our capital. It's distant enough. They're not responsive to our needs. I can't imagine having like another layer and having to go to Washington. Yeah. But I'm all for, you know, greater integration. Like I said earlier, Fortress North America, like the rest of the world is going to, you know, shit in a handbasket at the speed of light. Like I'll get together with my American cousins and let's trade more and let's you know, develop more, you know, security arrangements and so forth. But we have to carry more of our own weight. Trump is right about that. I mean, we've been basically, hanging onto your coattails in terms of our defense. And we need to spend a lot more on that. And Pierre Poilievre wants to build a big military installation up in the Arctic. So he's talking about beefing things up. I mean, I would love for us to produce our own fighter aircraft again, like we did in the 60s. The Avro Aero was state of the art. We need to bring that back. We need to build our own ships, and we need to be on a war footing. Because let's face it, we're really already at war with China. They declared war on North America back in the late 80s. Now it's not kinetic warfare. That's the last thing they want. But it's cyber warfare, and it's kind of like the reverse opium wars. Now they're flooding North America with fentanyl. 100,000 dead Americans every year. That's like a Vietnam era event every year. That's war.
Yeah, it is war, and I like what you're saying, dude. I mean, being open-minded, Richard, to working together more. Again, there's a lot of things that Trump is talking about that I'm not against at all, which is like this kind of pulling back from being everywhere all the time, policing the world, let people police themselves. I mean, it's just the way it is. We don't need to have bases everywhere. We don't need to have bases everywhere when we're being invaded from our borders. We don't.
Yeah. But you really think they'd take a base back?
I do. I think he's totally ready to do that. I think, when you start looking at dude, these audits, whatever you believe, and I think part of it is you audit everything. Everyone sees all the corruption. These institutions that have been a bedrock of our government, good or bad, the Fed, IRS, FEMA, all these, you start seeing that they're just money laundering organizations. They'll crumble. What replaces them? I do not know. Again, old boss, new boss, devil you know. But I do believe that's what's happening. They're showing us how bad these things are, so they do collapse, which I'm for. I'm for getting rid of corruption. There's no reason that we should have our dollar worth 90% of what it's worth before, so that corrupt people in Washington, D.C. can line their pockets. I'm totally down with that. And I would love to see Canada again. I think part of the beauty of Canada is that you have been allowed to kind of live this kind of weird fantasy where you don't have to worry about spending all this money on your military. And that's why everything, when I go up there, I'm like, oh, it's just beautiful here. Everything's beautiful.
Well, if you got to take the good, what about the bad?
What do you mean?
South.
Well,
Make it 52.
I mean, that's part of the Amero too.
Yeah,
that's
Mexico.
part of the North American thing. And the whole point of like making Mexico so unstable is cheap labor and to be able to let the cartels fund all these drug wars, because the intelligence agencies and the U.S. government make tons of money off of drug sales. So that's why they completely destabilize such a beautiful place like Mexico. But again, I love Canada. I hate seeing what's happening to you guys. Now, before we get into the final thing I want to talk to you about, or at least get into the Macron stuff, is there was a discussion that they got you with, hey, dude, we just want you to register your guns, so we know who has the guns, and that's all we want to know. And now they're like, oh, we're rounding up the guns and we're shipping them to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Insanity. Brilliant. Is that still happening?
As far as I know, I haven't heard anything recently about that, but that was the plan. Yeah. It started off with a long gun or rifles, right? Hunting rifles and so forth. They wanted us to register those. It was called a long gun registry. And they spent billions and billions of dollars. And that was just a complete, bamboozle and white elephant. And it was the same with the handguns. They were going to do this buyback program, but they had to hire an outside agency, to go around confiscating people's guns. And nobody wanted the job. They even tried to get the post office, Canada Post, to press their people, into service to go confiscate guns. And their union said, no, not going to happen. So again, this has just been another complete fiasco. But then they banned the sale of new handguns in Canada. No, you couldn't bequeath a handgun to a family member. So what happened was, just before the bill passed and became law, all the gun enthusiasts, people that own handguns, went out and they bought every handgun available So what they ended up happening was now you've got, millions and millions of more handguns in the country, which I think is a good thing. I'm a big Second Amendment guy. We gave that away a long time ago, unfortunately.
Dude.
But here's the thing. Now we have, like you do, we have home invasions and so forth, and we have people, carjackings. And the police up here were actually, they were serious, said it with a straight face. They said, you should leave your car keys at a table by the front door so that when they come to steal your car, they're not going to go, rampaging through the house and hurting anyone. The keys will be right there on the table, and then they can go and steal your car and do it quietly. Maybe we should leave them some milk and cookies, just like Santa Claus. This is the mindset that we have up here. We're supposed to cower under the bed and call 911 when people are busting into our house. And I was just on the radio the other day advocating we need a castle law up here in Canada. My home is my castle, and I should be able to use lethal force if necessary to defend my property, more importantly, my family. And, occasionally it happens where someone will kill a home invader up here with their hunting rifle or whatever, and they get arrested. They get charged. Now, often they get off, but you've got that hanging over your head for a year or two, manslaughter or second-degree murder or whatever. It's the process is the punishment. You're going to get off in the end, but you go through hell up until that point.
That is a big discussion. Libertarianism, everybody having their own security. And I go, well, we've seen what happens when there's no law enforcement. Absolute chaos breaks out when people aren't afraid of going to jail. But then you go, when people do strike back, push back, the law enforcement comes in and arrests all the people trying to defend themselves. So, but if we get to this place where you're like, no law enforcement, everyone defend for themselves, is that better, Johnny?
Well, but we've never actually tried that. What you're talking about is when temporarily they have pulled law enforcement back. What you're proposing?
I'm not against
what libertarians would propose is a new system, which would take a while for people to establish and organize these private security. So that it's never been given a real shot here. I mean, except in the days of the old West, when you'd hire, people to go out with you, but not in a real way.
So
in modern times. No.
In a weird way, would it be like insurance? Like I have to mandatory have this type of security, and then I have to.
That is mandatory. I don't.
Well, it'd be for the neighborhood.
Or for the neighborhood,
or like an
something.
HOA or something like that. Yeah, I could see that.
And then everyone has their different ones. You can pick, hey, I want this security. This one's better than this one. This one shows up faster than the other one.
Yeah, and then you could fire them when they don't do their job.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you see it, dude. I mean, we're in a neighborhood right here where the Orthodox have their own local security because they don't trust the LAPD to serve the community right. I mean, we see them driving around all the time.
Not against it.
Yeah.